Hey, you guys, it's your host, Julian. This week, I'm sitting down with Andrew Chesworth. Andrew got to start back at Disney, but the last couple years, he's been working on a few passion projects. Two of these shorts in particular, One Small Step and The Brave Locomotive. I highly recommend you check out both of these shorts. These films are nothing short, no pun intended, of perfection. Last little bit of housekeeping before we roll into this episode. I want to give a special shout out to a couple of our patrons that help make this podcast possible. Andrew, Bill, Brent, Patrick, and Jacob. Thank you all so much for your support. It means a lot. If you want to become a patron and help support this show, check the show notes below and sign up today. Now, let's get on to my chat with Andrew. Bye, Andrew. Andrew, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Julian.
Absolutely, man. Ladies and gentlemen, before you watch this, I need you to do two things. You need to go watch One Small Step. These are all on YouTube. And The Brave Locomotive, because we're going to deep dive into both of these, and we're going to be talking spoilers. So if you want to watch this and be informed of what we're talking about, go watch those two shorts. Those shorts will be in the show notes below. So click, point, go, and tell Andrew what you thought about them. So, Andrew, I got to tell you, I found you by The Brave Locomotive. And then I went on to your previous short, One Small Step. Which one do you want to start with? Do you want to start with your first one, or do you want to start with the current one? Dealer's choice.
Let's start with One Small Step since it was released first.
All right, well, you're going to make me cry right out the gate. Ladies and gentlemen, this one's a beautiful short. So before I tell you what I thought of it, I would love to know, how does One Small Step enter your brain?
Oh my goodness. Well, it actually entered the brain of my co-director, Bobby Pontius. He was a character designer and animator at Disney, extremely talented. And he also now runs a kind of a philanthropic effort called Rise Up Animation to promote new voices and animation, diverse perspectives and backgrounds. And he had pitched it at Disney with Trent Corey. And I think Disney passed on it for whatever reason. It was a different version of the story. It wasn't a Chinese American girl. And I think there was like a different timeline that the story went through. And then when we were both invited to join this startup company called Tycho, he was directing it and I was the head of story. And it was kind of being reshaped to have a Chinese American perspective to suit the background of our producer, Shafu Zhang, as well as Bobby's background as a Asian American immigrant raised by a single parent. And so as the story was developing and the company was finding its footing, we were trying to say, like, what do we want our first project as a startup company to be? My role as a head of story on the project became a little more involved. And so they, as in Bobby and Shafu, invited me to co-direct with Bobby. And I had a little bit more influence on the way the story was told from a directing standpoint, the shape of it in the script. I wrote a few drafts of the script that started from Bobby's outline. And then I also really wanted to involve music at the very beginning. And so a composer I'd worked with in my commercial years prior to Disney joined us, and I kind of interfaced with him on shaping a sound and a musical signature for the film that would give it this kind of once upon a time sort of feel, despite being a very modern story. So I would say Bobby brought the dreamer aspect of it, the girl who wants to be an astronaut, and that sort of aspirational feel. Shafu brought the very authentic San Francisco, Chinatown, Chinese American family perspective because he had lived that life. And Bobby and Shafu both had a version of the single parent immigrant experience growing up. And I would say I brought more of like the filmic structure aspect of it, like sort of the shot design, the way music and editorial work together, and just the kind of classic movie bones. I kind of became like the co-director who was all about the mechanics of the film. So I think it was a really rich partnership among the three of us. We all brought something very specific to it that made it what it was. And I think that's a big reason why the film has the depth that it has, is the combination of all the creators at the top of the storytelling process. We're very invested in it.
I could tell. And ladies and gentlemen, you've heard me talk many times when I've watched a bunch of different things, animated, live action. This thing hits you so hard in the feels. I don't want to say especially if you're a parent, because I've been a parent, non-parent before, but I'm a parent now, so it hit me a lot harder. Just seeing the dad take such a vested interest in his daughter's goal or dream, right, to become an astronaut, and push her in a way that is, you see, I mean, you'll see it. You got two kids, so you'll see it. You'll be a part of that. You'll push your kids towards their dreams. You'll be there for their failures, just like her dad was. Now, where it really started to turn, and it really grabbed a hold of me as you see her get older and you see him get older, because I'm going through that now. I'm seeing a 14-year-old here. He's seeing his 14-year-old. He's seeing her fail. He's seeing her succeed. He's seeing her try. He's seeing her cry. And he's there the entire time feeding her. He's there fixing her shoes. And there's just these little moments that you guys throw in. There's such personal touches. I loved the way you guys made the stars, because they reminded me of the stars that my mom hung up on my ceiling when I was younger. Those little neon green things that you see in the 90s. So that was a personal touch. And then having a single mom work two jobs with five kids at home, depending on, what era it was, that was a personal touch. And then getting to experience or see what my mom went through with me going through that now, with your kids growing older, them not needing you as much anymore, you kind of, not being the guy that's holding her back, but you're the guy that's kind of standing in their way of becoming who they're going to be eventually. This movie felt so personal. It was so beautiful. Like I said, it moved me to tears, and it's been not a long time since something's moved me to tears, but it's been some time since something like this has brought me to tears, man. And you guys, absolutely, I didn't know I needed this movie as much as I needed this movie. You know what I mean?
That means a lot. Thank you for sharing that, Julian. And when Bobby and I were working on it, there was this kind of perspective of wanting to celebrate the people who supported us in our dreams. What Xiaofu and Bobby and I all had in common was we all had parents who were extremely devoted to supporting us. We didn't have obstructionist parents, which a lot of people in animation come from backgrounds where the parents are like, "Are you sure you want to do that?
Mhm.
Maybe that's not such a great idea." And so, for all of us to have that devotion, we wanted to pay our respects to that and show our appreciation for that in the form of a story. Bobby and I used to say our version of stepping onto the moon and thinking of the people who were there for us is, our first day at Disney. Bobby and I
Yeah.
both started at Disney within a month of each other. I started in October 2011. I think he started in November of 2011. And for us, it was our dream job. And so being able to kind of do the symbolic version of that in the form of our film about a girl reaching for the stars meant a great deal. And so being able to kind of use animation to celebrate that journey we went on growing up was really special. We didn't want to waste the opportunity because we had funding to make this film. We had startup seed funding that Xiaofu had secured as our producer from China. And we didn't want to squander it. We wanted to really make a film with a story worth telling, because how often does that opportunity come along?
Very rarely does it. I mean, if this was a way for you guys to get your foot in the door, man, you kicked that door wide open with this one. Like I said, I found you through Brave Locomotive, and I was going to hold off watching One Small Step until after we talked, but it's just something I clicked on by accident. I'm like, all right, well, I don't feel like stopping it now. I'll see what this is about. Because whenever I have somebody on and I have a specific topic we want to talk about, I don't want to like influence something else or pull away from that topic. But this, like I said, this one was so special and it was so beautiful that I would feel remiss if I didn't bring it up and tell more people about this, to the best of my abilities. Now, with One Small Step, if you were to if you were to say, hey, I want you to watch this movie, but you had to pick a specific scene or a specific moment in this movie that you think tells everything it needs to tell and shows all the heart that this movie has, is there one scene that you worked on, and maybe one scene that a friend of yours worked on or one of your employees worked on, that tells this story flawlessly?
Well, I think Bobby and Shafu and I would all have our own scene from the film that means something to us. For me, it's probably the moment where she steps on the moon and it's like she's not even
Yeah,
looking at what's in front of her. She's thinking about everything. I'm gonna
that
lose it
got her
now too.
there. Yeah.
Everything that got her there, because that's the message of the film. It's like
Mm.
your dream means one thing to you when you're young, and it means something different to you when you're older. And I guess that's the best way I can put it, is like that hindsight is so different. You've achieved your dream, you've reached your goal, but it means something so different that you could have never imagined when you were a kid. And it's about the people who helped you get there, not the thing itself. And that's certainly how Bobby and I felt when we were at Disney, and it's certainly how our character feels when she steps onto the moon and thinks of her father. So that's the scene that I think just really guts me,
Hmm.
because I think Bobby and I get emotional by the film because it wasn't just like a thing one of us wrote and directed and put into the world. It was very much a communal experience between Shafu and Bobby and me and all of our crew. And I think that experience of all of us kind of being able to be part of the genesis of it, but also being able to step outside of it and take it in as an audience. That's a unique experience to have as a director. I don't have that same relationship with the Brave Locomotive. That's very much like I just like put that out into the world. And I'm like, what do
Yeah.
people think of it? Whereas with One Small Step, it kind of went on this long transformative genesis with a lot of different people influencing it, but it wasn't too many cooks. It was like the right amount of cooks that were all in sort of harmony with each other. And I think that's how the best things get made. And so yeah, definitely that scene of Luna stepping on the moon is the big one for me. But for me personally, I storyboarded the whole sequence where they imagine the box as a spaceship, and
Yes.
it's sort of the playtime with her and her dad. We had a different version of that that was less playful, less fun, and it didn't really feel like what childhood actually feels like. And that was always the scene in the film in the early reels where I'm like, this isn't quite like pulling me in. It's not quite endearing me to the characters. It was more like 2001 Space Odyssey, but with kids, a kid and her
Yeah.
parent. And it was too romantic or too formal. It didn't have the spontaneity and the silliness that playing with your parent when you're a little kid actually feels like. And so I just kind of straight ahead storyboarded that whole scene, and that's what you see in the film, just more finished. And that I think helps cement a relationship that you get invested in and can feel nostalgic for later because it felt authentic. It didn't feel
Yes.
formal or dramatic. And so we wanted the film to feel like what life feels like. It's silly, it's messy, it's frustrating, it's sad, it's
Yeah.
absurd, and then it's heartbreaking, and then it's, melancholic and reverential. And we wanted like all of the feelings of life to be in there, not just the serious ones, because that
Hmm.
doesn't feel real. That can start to feel more like propaganda. And I think our harshest criticisms of our own film in the early stages was this feels like an advertisement for feel good, or it feels like propaganda for family values. It doesn't feel like a real life. And so it was a hard journey to pack all of those feelings and moments into 7 minutes.
I don't see how you guys did this because after I finished watching it, you just brought it up, packing it into 7 minutes. I watched it. I'm like, man, that was a good 20. How is this 8 minutes, Andrew? How is this 8 minutes? This much heart, this much soul, this much, this much sadness, this much happiness, this much pride. The scene where you were talking about that meant the most to you, getting off and then seeing that whole collage of where she came from, seeing all of those people with their kids, all of those families. The first thing that came to mind was like, it takes a village to raise a kid, right? It
Yeah.
takes all of these people to push this person out in the world and make them a good person. Um, I loved that scene, but I loved seeing just her dad every time she would come home defeated. He wouldn't tell her to keep her head up, but he would put a dumpling, put something in her bowl, get her
Yeah.
to eat, to keep her head up, to keep her spirits up, to keep her motivation, her drive up. You wanted this, go get it, right? He was always inching her towards that goal. And then she realized that after she took a step away from her goal when her dad passed away, spoiler alert, ladies and gentlemen, probably should have did that before, but when she took a step back and she saw it already got me when you see the cane on the ground. It got me even harder when you see all of her shoes in the drawer. And I was like, damn it, damn it, Andrew. It's starting to come back now, man. Was there, whenever you have a movie, whenever you guys are working on a show, there's typically like a driving message or a motto or a mantra that studio or every project has. Was there one, I know this was 5 years ago, but was there one that you guys might have had, like, we got to find the heart or we got to find the story? Was there one that sticks out?
For one small step, it was just I just remember it being a love letter to the people who help us achieve our dreams,
Mm,
and the superficial notion of reaching for the stars. But I think it also was deeply intertwined with Taiko as a company, as a startup studio. Their mission was to bridge Eastern and Western values and
mhm.
perspectives through animation. And so a Chinese American immigrant story was a big part of it. And I think that added a layer to it that wasn't in the version that was pitched to Disney, which was just, I think it was just like a regular American girl who wanted to be an astronaut, and you saw the stages of her life, and it was well thought out, but it was very straightforward. And I think adding that extra perspective to it gave it another layer of like nuance that made it specific, because there's an extra layer of challenge to being a single parent and an immigrant parent
Mhm.
in the United States. And I think, and then to go from that to walking on the moon, it gave the story bigger contrast, and stories and drama love contrast. And so that helped us on a personal level and on a cinematic technical level. Not to be too formal about it, but
Oh, no, you're
there were
fine.
just a lot of upsides to the way it ended up, I think. And it's funny, like the upsides to it were also the things that made it more specific to the people making it, which was, it's always a good thing when you can make it more personal, and when making it more personal makes it more dramatically relevant.
If you're into anime, manga, comic books, movie reviews, or just pop culture, Spoiler Force Podcast is the place for you. Not only do I talk about nerdy topics, I have conversations with a variety of guests, such as musicians, Comic Con artists, cosplayers, other podcasters, and people from all over the world. Join me as I go on this journey to find ways to help others express themselves with their creativity.
And it made us, like I said, I saw myself as that dad, me getting older, my kids getting older, them going out into life, starting their life, me kind of on the backside of my life. I don't mean to get so dramatic or melodramatic or melancholy, but it's just like it felt real. Like I can see it's like a parallel universe if I was watching my life go. I mean, that's what my life is going to end up being. And like I said, this one was just so special. The other thing that I love that you hit on earlier was the music. At what point when you guys are working on this is music a focal point? Are you thinking like when you're animating, like I think this would be the type of music play and that plays into your style or what you're working on? How does music influence you into this one in particular?
Yeah, this is interesting, because the reason we did music the way we did on One Small Step was because of my experience on the Brave Locomotive. Years ago, when I developed the Locomotive project, I worked with a composer named Tom Hambleton to shape the music while we were doing the storyboards, like the old Disney films. And while Locomotive was on the shelf, collecting dust on my hard drive, I was invited to do this One Small Step project. And I just had an idea early that I thought this project could really benefit emotionally from shaping the music while we were doing the story reels, instead of just boarding it out straight ahead, and then putting some temp music on it and saying like, okay, then we'll rescore it later. I thought there was an opportunity to do something really specific that made it feel like the way the old Disney films made us feel, like Dumbo, Bambi,
Hmm.
the really emotional early films where Frank Churchill and Lee Harline and Oliver Wallace, they were crafting the music on these Disney films while they were shaping the visuals, and it gives them such a like a rich, intertwined kind of feeling. Like you watch the opening of Peter Pan or the opening of Bambi or the opening of Pinocchio with Geppetto, that music was crafted with those story drawings, and that mindset. It was a different style of music and a different tone. That was the approach we took on Locomotive, and I wanted that on One Small Step for that reason. It's like mixing a very contemporary story with a very classical format of animation storytelling. And Steve Horner was a composer who I'd worked with in commercials, and he was very nimble, very versatile. And even though I didn't work with him on Locomotive, I thought he had a vocabulary that was a little more like contemporary, and I'd worked with him more frequently and more recently. So I thought this could be a good marriage for this specific project. And also, he works only on the box, as in he's like a one-man music studio, so that on a practical level suited our startup resources as well. So there were a lot of just reasons that I thought this could be a good fit. Um, so I interfaced a lot with Steve. I would go over to his studio in Encino. I live in Burbank, so 15-minute drive, and we would just spend all day in his studio looking at the boards, hashing out melodies and talking about like, oh, we could reuse this theme here, or it'd be really powerful if this theme at the beginning was explored in a more dramatic way here. And this is when we're still like in the middle of storyboarding the film, so it was a very like rich process crafting every aspect of the film together, simultaneously. So Bobby would be back at the Burbank studio kind of designing the environments, the look of the characters, you know, coming up with a lighting scheme and a color scheme for the film, and then I'd be at Steve's place working on the music with the storyboards. Bobby and I each storyboarded about 50% of the film, and then our producer Shafu and I shared editing duties, and then I would kind of do the fine-tuning on the final edit to really work with Steve on how the music would work with that. And we had a fully storyboarded film with no animation, with like basically nearly finished music, and then Steve did a polish pass on the music once the animation was more finished. But it was really cool that we basically had a finished version of the film before any animation was even done.
Is so when Steve is doing this, is
Uh-huh.
it? You said that the script would change a couple different times once you came on, and then you
Yeah.
guys were really trying to flush it out. Was his initial pass of the music like dead set for what you guys were looking for, or do you remember how long it might have taken to flesh out the sound and the vibe that you guys were looking for?
We had an initial meeting with him, and we just showed him some story beat drawings of different scenes in the film. We showed him the character designs, and we pitched him the concept, and he kind of had some ideas percolating of what the signatures could sound like. Like the dad's signature was the cello,
Hmm.
and Luna's signature was the bells. And he would kind of play with different variations on those signatures based on the scene, and that would give it this kind of like Peter and the Wolf kind of feel. Like that, we specifically mentioned Peter and the Wolf, where Grandpa Pa's the bassoon and the wolf is like this kind of more menacing sound. I think in Peter and the Wolf, they're each a specific instrument, and so we wanted some of that feel with the old Disney melodic structure, but a more contemporary arrangement, so it didn't feel completely rooted in the past, because the film takes place in the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, um, over the span of the montage. But yeah, Steve got involved more heavily once we had some sequences storyboarded. I think the final sequence in the film, which Bobby storyboarded, with like her landing on the moon and the doors opening and her stepping out, that might have been one of the first bits that Steve did some music for. And we knew that whatever we did for the end was going to be done at the beginning to kind of predict where we were going. So we kind of worked backwards. The final sequence in the film was one of the first things that we got and just committed to. It was all the stuff leading up to it that kind of kept changing and shifting over time. And I would say the montage in the middle of the film was the messiest part. The things would change the most.
Yeah.
And what if we showed her doing this instead of that? Or, oh, maybe we don't show this. Maybe we don't show the dad having struggles with customers at work. Maybe we don't show her going on a date with a boy and the dad disapproving. It was like getting a little dense.
Hmm.
And we didn't want to kind of touch on too many things that could open doors that we'd have to close later. So we yeah, we kind of worked out a lot of different ways that montage could go before we settled on what we ended up with. But Steve was a real champ, and the musical signatures actually didn't change that much. It was just kind of the little flourishes, and it would change as we changed around some of those things that we were seeing in that montage.
Now, with you saying you started with that last scene, first and then work your way backwards. Is that typically how you like to do it? You like to start at the end and then kind of fill in the pieces as you go backwards?
I think it depends on the story. With One Small Step, I think that one we just cracked it and we didn't feel compelled to change it. We would have changed it if we felt like we needed to. But I think for some reason it just felt like, this ending works. And because we had a script that we were happy with. We had like 4 or 5 written drafts of a script. I had 4 different 8-page scripts, and I'd read them aloud to the studio each time there was a new draft, and we'd talk about it in the room. We'd write down our notes. I'd go home and kind of readjust the draft based on the notes from our core team. And I think because we kind of broke it down on the page really tightly first, once we storyboarded that final sequence, we're like, yeah, this feels like what we were happy with on the page. And the script had more of those beats in the montage depicted. And when we were editing it together, we're like, that doesn't quite work. What if I drew this? And it became more improvisational after we had to actually see what we had scripted, visualized. And so the montage in the middle changed a lot. The big change was the fantasy sequence. And actually, that fantasy sequence I did, because I did that sort of spontaneously and improvisationally after there was a previous version, I just kind of cut that together a certain way. And then Steve wrote some music to it after the fact, and I think I maybe just cinched it up a little bit to what he orchestrated. So that was maybe a bit that was more traditionally visualized and then scored because it came a little bit later into the story process. Oh, I did have one more thing about One Small Step that I felt very passionate about as a co-director on the project. Like on top of being given the great privilege of getting to work with Steve on the music and having that trust from my co-director and producer, I felt very strongly that I wanted the character animation to feel like a mix of Studio Ghibli, like
Mhm.
Miyazaki's
Yeah.
very subtle, observed, precise
Mhm.
acting with the kind of 1940s flourishy Disney animation, because that felt like a great mix of East and West that
Yes.
was true to the vision of our company. Like, what if you had like these more Miyazaki inspired characters moving a little bit more like classic Disney, but not to the point that it's annoying or distracting and it doesn't feel unnatural. So there was like a look and feel to the animation that we wanted, that we were very specific about, and I'm really happy with how that turned out.
You should be. This is 10 out of 10, would recommend to everybody. Like I said, this is something I needed to see when I needed to see it, and I'm really glad that I'd reached out to you and said, "Hey, I'd love to have you on," and I'm even more glad that you said, "Yeah, I'll come on." And then that led me down to seeing this one because, like I said, it was perfect. It was a fucking masterpiece. At the end of the day, I look at this and I'm like, there's not too many things that I could put on the same level as this that's coming out. Like I said, it blew me away in every possible way you could think of. Um, Before we rotate off into this one and rotate into the Brave Locomotive, if you could sum up one small step in one word, one sentence, one phrase, what would it be?
Gratitude, I think.
Yeah, beautiful. You want to expound upon that a little bit?
Grateful for the opportunity to make it, grateful for the people who created the environment where I could help make it with them, grateful for the people like my family who supported me in this whole career that I'm on. And um, it's just when you're a part of a project like that, you realize just how much of it is circumstantial and a result of good fortune and trying to make the most of the good fortune that comes your way. And the circumstances around that project were just so unique and so special. And I'm just so grateful I got to be a part of it.
Yeah, beautiful,
And I'm
man.
grateful to Bobby and Shafu for trusting me to be in that creative leadership role with them.
I'm grateful for every single person that lent a pencil, lent a word, lent a musical note, lent a piece of whatever. I mean, even if it was just spitballing, you guys were working on ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, go watch this one and then go watch The Brave Locomotive. Watch it 100 times and really kick that view count up. So the next one we're going to rotate into, this is actually how I found you. And then when I started doing a deep dive into your career, I'm just like, dude, how How the fuck do I not know this guy's name? I'm just sitting here. I'm like, I've seen this movie. I've seen this movie 1,000 times. I've seen that one 400 times this week alone. I mean, it's just so many movies that you've worked on that you've lent your fucking talents to that I'm just blown away by. I mean, and then I go and see, like I said, the Brave Locomotive. That's how I got here, ladies and gentlemen. That's how I found Andrew. I want to throw a couple movies out there that I thought that I was pulling from inspiration. Like I said, I do these both sober and stoned, so these some of these might be a little far-fetched. But the initial pass I watched it sober, and I pulled Radigan for the Baron. I was getting a Radigan slash Vincent Price from the